Stan the Killer by Georges Simenon. Maigret puffed at his pipe as he walked along slowly, hands clasped behind his back. It was not a simple matter to push his heavy body through the morning mob in the Rue Saint-Antoine, where a bright sun poured down on carts and baskets of fruits and vegetables, blocking almost the entire width of the pavement. It was marketing time, the time for feeling artichokes and tasting cherries, the time for scallops and chops to take turns in the scales. Salesmen in white aprons, butchers in fine checks, the smell of cheese here and a whiff of roasting coffee there, the ping of cash registers and the distrustful glances of housewives. And in the midst of it all, the slow, heavy progress of Maigret on one of his most tormenting cases. Across from the Rue de Birague there's a little café with 3 tables in front of it called the Barrel of Burgundy. There Maigret settled himself like any other weary passer-by. He did not even look up at the tall, thin waiter who came for his order. "Small white macron," he muttered. And who was to guess that this occasionally inept new waiter at the Barrel of Burgundy was otherwise known as Detective Janvier? The waiter returned with the wine precariously balanced on a tray. He wiped the table with a questionable cloth, and was even so clumsy as to drop a scrap of paper on the floor. Maigret picked it up as he left and read. "The woman's gone out marketing. No sign of One Eye. The beard left early. The 3 others must still be in the hotel." At 10 in the morning, the crowd was getting even worse. Next to the Barrel, a grocer's shop was having a sale, and barkers kept entreating the passers-by to sample biscuits, cake, country cheeses. At the corner of the Rue de Birague, you could see the sign of a dingy hotel. Rooms by the month, week, or day. Payment in advance. With doubtless intentional irony, this rat trap had chosen to call itself the Beau Séjour. Maigret sipped at his light, dry white wine and stared apparently aimlessly at the teeming crowd in the spring sun. But his gaze soon settled on a window in the first floor of a house in the Rue de Birague, opposite the hotel. At that window, a little old man sat by a canary's cage, and seemed to have no interest in life but to bask in the sun for as long as the Lord should deign to leave him alive. And this old gentleman, who took no notice of Maigret, was Sergeant Lucas, aged some 20 years. All this constituted a state of siege, which is more commonly known to the police as a stakeout. It had lasted 6 days, and at least twice a day the inspector came around for the latest news. At night his men were relieved by a patrolman who was actually a detective from the judiciary police, and a wench who contrived to walk the streets without ever picking up a customer. The crowd shoved by so close to the tiny terrace of the Barrel of Burgundy that Maigret found himself constantly obliged to pull his legs back under his chair. And now, as he did so once more, he suddenly realized that a man had sat down, unnoticed, at the same table. He was a little man, with red hair and sad eyes, whose mournful face had something of the clown about it. "You again," the inspector grunted. "I beg you to forgive me, Monsieur Maigret, but I am certain that you will eventually accept the proposition which," he broke off to say to the waiterly Janvier, "the same as my friend." He had an extremely marked Eastern European accent. He presumably suffered from throat trouble, and constantly chewed at a cigar-shaped object impregnated with creosote. "You're getting on my nerves," Maigret burst out. "Will you kindly tell me how you knew I'd come here this morning?" "I did not know." "Then why are you here?" Are you going to try to convince me that this is an accidental meeting? No. The little man's yellow eyes gazed around him, staring into emptiness. He spoke in a sad voice, unvarying in pitch, as though perpetually offering condolences. You are not nice to me, Monsieur Maigret. That isn't answering my question. How do you happen to be here this morning? I've followed you. From headquarters, long before that, from your home. So you admit you're spying on me? I am not spying on you, Monsieur Maigret. I have far too much respect and admiration for you. I have already stated to you that I shall one day be your collaborator. And he sighed nostalgically, contemplating the artificial ash of painted wood which tipped his creosote cigar. There'd been nothing about it in any of the newspapers save one, and that one, which had got the tip from the Lord knows where, uniquely complicated the inspector's task. The police have reason to believe that Stan the Killer's gang of bandits are at this moment in Paris. It was true enough, but silence would have been more helpful. In 4 years, a gang of unknown foreign nationals had attacked 5 farms, always in the north of France, always with the same methods. In each case, it was an isolated farm run by elderly people. The crime invariably took place the night of a market day, and the chosen victims were always those who had sold a good number of fowls and animals and had a large sum of cash in hand. Nothing scientific about the procedure. Brutal attack, as in the days of the highway robbers. Absolute contempt for human life. These bandits killed every human being they found on the farm, even down to the children. It was the one way of making sure they could never be identified. Were there 2 of them, or 5, or 8? In every case, neighbours had noticed a small truck. One 12-year-old claimed he had seen a one-eyed man. Some asserted that the killers wore black masks. Whatever the facts, one thing was certain. Every inhabitant of each farm had had his throat sliced. This was no business of the Paris police. This was up to the mobile units in the provinces, who worked on it for 2 years without remotely clarifying the mystery, a failure which did not reassure the countryside. Then a report came in from Lille, from a colony of Polish miners. The report was vague enough. It was impossible even to establish its ultimate source. The Poles say that this is Stan the Killer's gang. But when the police tried to question the coal miners one by one, the men had never heard of it, or muttered, "Well, they told me." "Who's they?" I don't know. I forget." Then came the crime near Rheims, where the gang overlooked a servant girl sleeping in the attic, who became the first survivor. She had heard the murderers talking in a language which she thought was Polish. She had seen their masks through a hole in the boards, and had noticed that one of the men had only one eye, and that another, a giant of a man, was extraordinarily hairy. And so the police had come to refer to them as Stan the Killer, the Beard, and One Eye. For months, nothing more turned up, until a detective on the hotel squad made a discovery. His territory was the Saint-Antoine district, and in a hotel in the Rue de Bérague he observed a suspicious group which included a one-eyed man and a giant whose face was literally covered with hair. They were seemingly poor people. The bearded giant and his wife rented a room by the week, but almost every night they gave shelter to several compatriots. Everything was strictly hush-hush, and so the next day one newspaper printed the story. The day after that, Maigret found a letter in his mail, clumsily written in an almost childish hand, full of misspellings, on the cheap sort of paper sold in grocery stores. "You won't ever get Stan. Look out! Before you can take him, he'll have time to kill off plenty more." The letter was no hoax. Maigret was certain. It felt right. It had the filthy aftertaste of the underworld. "Be careful," the chief advised. "Don't rush into an arrest. The man who's cut 16 throats in 4 years won't hesitate to scatter a few bullets around him when he sees he's done for." Which was why Janvier had become a waiter and Lucas a basking old man. The noisy life of the quarter went on with no suspicion that a desperate man might at any moment start firing in all directions. And then Michael Ozep appeared. His first meeting with Maigret had been 4 days ago. He had arrived at headquarters and insisted on seeing the inspector personally. Maigret had let him wait a good 2 hours, but the little man was undaunted. He entered the office, clicked his heels, bowed, and extended his hand. "Michael Ozep, former officer in the Polish forces, now teacher of gymnastics in Paris." The Pole spoke so volubly and with so pronounced an accent that it was sometimes impossible to follow him. He explained that he came of a very good family, that he could not go back to Poland to retrieve his property, and that he had sunk to depths of despair because even now he still could not accustom himself to leading a mediocre life. "You understand, Monsieur Maigret," it was impossible to wean him from that pronunciation. "I am a gentleman. Here I am forced to give lessons to individuals of no culture and no education. I am a poor man. I have decided to commit suicide." A nut, Maigret thought to himself. An astonishing number of the unbalanced feel need of confiding their problems to the police. He was used to such visits. "I tried it 3 weeks ago. I threw myself into the Seine, but the river squad saw me and pulled me out." Maigret invented a pretext to step into the next office and phoned the river squad. The story was true. 6 days later, I tried to gas myself, but the postman came with a letter and opened the door. I truly want to kill myself. Do you understand? My existence has lost all value. A gentleman cannot consent to live in poverty and mediocrity. Therefore, I thought that you might have need of a man like me." Ozep paused. "For what?" "To help you to arrest Stan the killer." Maigret frowned. "You know him?" "No, I have only heard talk about him. As a Pole, I am indignant that a man of my people should so violate the laws of hospitality. I should like to see Stan and his gang arrested. Among those who go to arrest him, some will certainly be killed. Is it not better, then, than it should be I, since I already desire to die?" All Maigret found himself capable of saying was the traditional formula, "Leave your address, I'll write you a letter." Michael Ozep had a furnished room in the Rue des Tournelles, not far from the Rue de Birague. The report of the investigating detective was in his favour. He had indeed been a second lieutenant in the Polish forces, but after that his trail vanished. In Paris he taught gymnastics, and his suicide attempts were genuine. Nevertheless, Maigret sent him an official letter ending, "Deeply regret that I cannot take advantage of your generous proposition, for which my most sincere thanks." Twice since then, Ozep had appeared at the Quai des Orfèvres and insisted on seeing the inspector. The second time he had even refused to leave, claiming that he could wait as long as he was obliged to. And now Ozep sat there at Maigret's table in front of the Barrel of Burgundy. "I wish to prove to you, Monsieur Maigret, that I am of some use and that you can accept my services. I have been following you for 3 days, and I am in a position to tell you everything that you have done during that time. I know, too, that the waiter who just brought my wine is one of your detectives, and that there is another at the window across from us." Maigret clenched his pipe furiously between his teeth and kept his eyes turned away from the Pole, who went on and on in his monotonous voice. It wore Maigret out merely to listen to him, especially since the accent so distorted each syllable that he had to concentrate to follow the sense. "You are not a Pole, Monsieur Maigret. You do not speak the language. I earnestly desire to help you, for I cannot see the good name of my native land tarnished." The inspector was beginning to choke with anger. The former second lieutenant could hardly fail to observe the fact, but he continued, nevertheless, "If you try to capture Stan, what will he do? He has 2, maybe 3 revolvers in his pockets. He fires at everybody. Who knows how many ladies he wounds, how many little babies he kills. Then people will say that the police, will you shut up? Now, as for me, I am resolved to die. Nobody will weep for poor Ozep. You say to me, 'There is Stan,' and I follow him as I have followed you. I wait for the moment when there is no one near us, and I say, 'You are Stan the killer.' Then he fires at me, and I shoot him in the leg. By the fact that he shoots me, you have your proof that he is Stan, and you are not making a blunder. And since he is crippled by my shot, supposing I have you arrested," Maigret broke in crudely. "Why? To get a little peace. What would you say? What has poor Ozep done in violation of the laws of France, which he wishes only to defend, and for which he is offering up his life? Stuff it. I beg your pardon. Are you agreeing?" "Not in the least." At that moment a woman went by, a woman with blonde hair and a clear complexion, recognizably a foreigner. She was carrying a shopping bag and was headed for the butcher's shop. Maigret was following her with his eyes when he noticed that his companion had suddenly started to mop his brow with an enormous handkerchief. "That is the mistress of Stan, is it not?" Ozep asked. "Will you be quiet? You have convinced yourself that this is the mistress of Stan, but you do not know which one is Stan. You think it is the one with the beard. No, the bearded one is called Boris, and the man with the one eye is Sasha. He is not a Pole, he is Russian-born. If you should investigate them yourself, you will learn nothing." No housewife shopping in the confusion of the Rue Saint-Antoine could suspect the subjects being discussed on the tiny terrace of the Barrel of Burgundy. The blonde foreigner was buying chops at a nearby butcher's stall. In her eyes there was something of that same lassitude that lay in the eyes of Ozep. "Perhaps you fear you may be called to account if I am killed. In the first place, I have no family. In the second place, I have written a letter in which I state that I alone and purely of my own volition have sought this death." Poor Janvier stood on the threshold, trying to think of a way of telling Maigret that there was a telephone message for him. Maigret noticed the ambiguous pantomime, but went on watching the pole and puffing forth little clouds of pipe smoke. "Listen, Ozep." "Yes, Monsieur Maigret." "If you're seen again anywhere around the Rue Saint-Antoine, I'll have you arrested." "You are refusing this offer which I—" "Get out, or I'll arrest you here and now." The little man rose, clicked his heels, bowed almost double, and executed a dignified retreat. Maigret had noticed one of his detectives nearby. Now he signalled the man to follow the peculiar teacher of gymnastics. At last Janvier could deliver his message. "Lucas just phoned. He spotted that they have guns in the room. 5 Poles slept in the next room last night, leaving the door open between them. Some of them had to sleep on the floor." "Who the devil was that character you were talking to?" "No one. How much?" Janvier slipped back into character, pointing at Ozep's glass. "You're paying Monsieur's bill?" Maigret took a taxi to headquarters. At the door of his office he found the detective who had set out after Ozep. "You lost him," he roared. "Aren't you ashamed of yourself? I give you the most childish job of shadowing, and you—" "I didn't lose him," the detective murmured humbly. "Where is he?" "Here." "You pulled him in?" He pulled me." For Ozep had indeed headed directly for headquarters, where he had placidly installed himself and his sandwich in the waiting room, after announcing that he had an appointment with Inspector Maigret. There's no kudos in paperwork, but there may be the solution of a case. Unwillingly, irritatedly, Maigret was adding up in one report in his own large handwriting the various information obtained in 2 weeks' siege of the gang. When he set down the facts in order, he could see even more easily how very little they had learned. They did not even know precisely how many individuals belonged to the gang. The earlier reports from the people who had seen or thought they had seen the bandits near the time of the attacks stated that there were 4 of them, sometimes 5. It was probable that they had other accomplices who cased the farms and markets beforehand. That brought the number to 6 or 7, which seemed to correspond roughly with the number who hung around the nucleus in the Rue de Birague. There were only 3 regular tenants, all of whose papers seemed to be in order. Boris Saft, the one the police called the Beard, who seemed to live as man and wife with the pale blonde. Olga Cherevsky, 28, born in Vilno. Sasha Vorontsov, known as the One-Eye. Boris the Beard and Olga occupied one room, Sasha One-Eye the next. The door between was always left open. The young woman did the shopping every morning and cooked the meals on a gas stove. The Beard rarely went out, but spent most of his days stretched on the iron bedstead, reading Polish-language newspapers, which he had one of the gang buy for him at the newspaper kiosks at the Place de la Bastille. Once the errand boy brought back an American fact detective magazine in addition to the other newspapers. They all read that. One-Eye went out often, always followed by one of Maigret's detectives, a fact of which he was probably aware, since he never did more than take long walks through Paris, stopping in many bars, but never speaking to a soul. As for the rest, they were what Lucas called the floating population. People came and went, always the same lot, 4 or 5 of them. Olga fed them, and sometimes they slept on the floor overnight. There was nothing odd about this. It happens in many hotels with poor clientele. Exiles who get together to rent a room and then put up any of their compatriots they come across. On the floating population, Maigret had a few notes. The chemist, so called because he had tried to obtain a job at a chemical plant. His clothes were badly worn, but rather well cut. For hours he would wander around the streets of Paris like a man looking for any way to earn a little money, and once, for a whole day, he was employed as a sandwich man. Spinach, named after his implausible spinach green hat, which seemed even more unlikely in view of his faded pink shirt. Spinach went out, particularly in the evenings, when he picked up tips opening car doors in front of the Montmartre bars. Puffy, a fat, wheezy little man, better dressed than the others. And there were 2 others who visited the hotel less regularly. It was hard to say if they belonged to the gang. Maigret stared at the notes with the exasperated feeling that the most important detail was somehow eluding him. Finally, he picked up his pen again and wrote. These people give the impression of penniless foreigners looking for any kind of work at all, but there's always vodka in the rooms, and sometimes impressive spreads of food. Maybe the gang knows it's being watched and is putting on an act for the police. If one of them is Stan the Killer, it's probably either the Beard or One-Eye. But this is only guesswork. It was without the least enthusiasm that he brought his report to the chief. Nothing new, nothing specific. I'd swear the rascals have spotted one of our men and are simply amusing themselves, seeing how often they can come in and go out on innocent errands. They know we can't keep a large section of the force mobilized on their account forever. Time's on their side. They have lots of it. You have a plan? Look, Chief, you'll hear people say I'm waiting for inspiration. They couldn't be more wrong. What I'm waiting for is for the one significant happening that never fails to turn up. The whole thing is being there when it does turn up, so that I can take advantage of it. So, you're waiting for a happening? The chief smiled. He knew his man. This much I'm convinced of. This is Stan the Killer's gang. Because of that fool reporter who keeps hanging round here, they're on their guard. Now, what I want to know is, why did Stan write to me? Perhaps out of sheer bravado. These killers have their pride, you might almost say professional pride. But which of them is Stan? And why that nickname? It's more American than Polish. You know how I take my time before I reach any conclusions? Well, it's beginning to come. The last 2 or 3 days I've begun to get the feel of the psychology of these boys. Very different from French murderers. They need money, not to have a fling in the night spots or to clear out of the country, but just simply to live their own lives, which for them means doing nothing, eating, drinking, sleeping, spending their days stretched out on a bed, smoking cigarettes, gossiping, and killing bottles of vodka. The way I see it, after their first crime they lived like this until the money ran out. Then they got ready for another job. Whenever the funds are low, they start again, coldly, without remorse, without a trace of pity for the old people whose throats they cut, and whose life savings they eat up in a few weeks or months. And now that I've got the feel of it, I'm waiting. The happening may even be here already. Where? In the waiting room. The little man who calls me Maigret and who wants to help in the arrest even if it costs him his skin. He claims it's just another method of suicide. Crackpot. Could be. Or an accomplice of Stan's who's using this method of keeping in touch with what we're doing. Maigret emptied his pipe by tapping it gently on the window ledge so that the ashes fell somewhere on the Quai des Orfèvres, perhaps on the hat of a passer-by. He bothers me, that little man, he added. I've seen his face somewhere. It's not in our files, but I've seen it. And I've seen the girl, too, the blonde. She's worth remembering. The chief leaned forward. We've been going on the assumption that the blonde is Stan's mistress. You associate her and the little man. You see the possible implication. That my little man is Stan himself. Could be. Are you going to accept this man's offer? I think so. The inspector headed for the door. He felt he'd said enough. You'll see, Chief, I'll be amazed if we still need the stakeout by the end of this week. And it was Thursday afternoon, now. Sit down. Doesn't it get on your nerves to suck at that filthy creosote cigar all day? No, Monsieur Maigret. That Maigret of yours is beginning to get me. However, let's get down to business. Now, tell me, are you still set on dying? Yes, Monsieur Maigret. And if I told you to go up to One Eye and fire a bullet into his leg, you'd do it? Yes, Monsieur Maigret, but you would first have to give me a revolver. I am a poor man, and... Now, suppose I tell you to go to the Beard or One Eye, and say you have important information, that the police are coming to arrest them. Gladly, Monsieur Maigret, I shall wait until One Eye passes by in the street, and then I shall perform my commission. The lowering gaze of the inspector had no effect on the little Pole. Rarely had Maigret seen a man who combined such self-assurance with such utter serenity. Michael Ozep spoke of killing himself or of visiting the Polish gang as simply, as naturally, as he might refer to brushing his teeth. You've never met either of them? No, Monsieur Maigret. All right, I'm going to give you the job, and if there's any trouble, it's on your head. Maigret lowered his eyelids to conceal his too sharp interest in the other's reaction. In a minute we'll go together to the Rue Saint-Antoine. I'll wait for you outside. You'll go up to the room, picking a time when the woman is there alone. You'll tell her you're a fellow Pole, and you happen by chance to learn that the police are raiding the hotel tonight. Ozep said nothing. You understand? Yes. It's all set? I must confess something to you, Monsieur Maigret. You're turning yellow. Yellow? I do not understand. Ah, yes. No, I am not turning yellow, but I should prefer to arrange the matter in a different way. I am a timid man with the ladies, and the ladies are intelligent, far more intelligent than we men. Therefore, she will see that I am lying, and because I know that she will see that I am lying, I shall blush, and when I blush—" Maigret sat motionless, absorbing this unlikely explanation. "I should prefer to talk to a man, to the one with the beard, if you like, or the one you call One-Eye, or anyone at all." A ray of sunlight pierced slantwise through the office and lit full on Maigret's face. He seemed to be dozing, like a man whose injudiciously heavy lunch obliges him to take a siesta. "It is exactly the same thing, Monsieur Maigret." But Monsieur Maigret did not answer. The only sign that he was still alive was the slim blue spiral which rose from his pipe. "I am desolated. You demand precisely the one thing which—" "Forget it." "I beg your pardon?" "I said, forget it." "Where did you know the woman, Olga Cherevsky?" "I? Answer me." "I do not understand what you mean." "Answer me." "I do not know this woman. If I knew her, I would tell you so." "Where did you know her?" "I swear to you, Monsieur Maigret, that—" "Where did you know her?" "Why have you suddenly stopped being nice to me? You talk to me so brutally. To me, who came here to place myself at your disposal to prevent Frenchmen from being murdered by a compatriot. Cut the talk. Monsieur, please ask me anything else to throw myself under a subway train. I'm asking you to go and see the woman and tell her that we'll make a raid tonight. And if I refuse, then you had better see to it that I never lay eyes on you again." "Are you really going to arrest the gang tonight?" "Probably." "At what time will you make the raid?" "Let's say 1 in the morning. I am going." "Where?" "To find the woman." "Just a minute. We're going together." "It is better that I go alone. If one of them sees us, he will understand that I am assisting the police." The Pole had hardly left the office, of course, before the inspector had set a detective at his heels, and without losing a moment, Maigret hurried downstairs and leaped into a taxi. "Corner of the Rue de Berague and Rue Saint-Antoine as fast as you can make it." It was a radiant afternoon. Striped awnings lent a note of colour to the shops. In their shadows, dogs sprawled and napped, and all life seemed to run in slow motion. One felt that even the buses had a hard time making headway in the hot, heavy air. Their wheels left tracks in the heated asphalt. Maigret sprang out of the taxi into the house on the corner. On the second floor, he opened a door without bothering to knock, and found Lucas sitting at the window, still in the role of a quiet and curious elderly gentleman. The room was shabby but clean. On the table lay the remains of a cold meal that Lucas had had sent up from a delicatessen. "Anything new, Inspector? Anybody at home across the way?" The room had been chosen for its strategic position. You could see straight into the 2 rooms of the Hotel Beau Séjour which the Poles occupied. In this heat, all the windows of another adjoining room were unshuttered and open, revealing a young girl scantily clad asleep on a bed. "Well, well, Lucas, looks like you don't find your job too boring." A pair of field glasses on a chair gave evidence that Lucas attended to his work conscientiously and missed no detail, however slight. "At the moment," said the sergeant, "there are 2 of them in the rooms, but there'll be only 1 in a minute. The man's getting dressed. He stayed in bed all morning, as usual." "That's the beard." "Yes, there were 3 of them for lunch, the beard, the woman and One-Eye. One-Eye left as soon as he'd eaten. Then the beard got up and began to dress. Well, he's just put on a clean shirt. That doesn't happen very often." Maigret walked over to the window. The hairy giant was knotting his tie. You could see the man's lips move as he looked at himself in the mirror. Behind him, the blonde woman was cleaning up, gathering papers and rolling them into a ball, turning off the stove, dusting the frame of a bright-coloured picture on the wall. "If only we knew what they were saying," Lucas sighed. "There are times when it drives me crazy. I watch them talking and talking, and they never stop." The limitless resources of the police, said Maigret dryly, do not include a lip reader who knows Polish. It gets on my nerves. I'm beginning to understand the torture it must be to be deaf. Do you think the woman will stay there? This isn't the time she usually goes out, and if she meant to, she would have put on her grey suit. Olga was wearing the same dark wool dress in which she had done her marketing that morning. While she cleaned up her bohemian establishment, she kept smoking a cigarette without ever taking it from her lips in the fashion of the habitual smoker. She never talks, Maigret observed. This isn't the time she does that either. It's in the evenings that she gets to talking, when they're all gathered round. Or a few times when she's alone with the one I call Spinach, which doesn't happen very often. Either I'm badly mistaken, or she has a weakness for Spinach. He's the best looking of the lot. It was a strange experience to be in an unknown room like this, to look into the lives of people and come to know their smallest gestures. You're getting as snoopy as a concierge, Lucas. That's what I'm here for, isn't it? I can even tell you that the little girl over there, the one who's sleeping so soundly, was making love last night until 3 a.m. with a young man in a dinner jacket who left at dawn, undoubtedly so he could get into his family's house unnoticed. Hold on! Oh, now the beard's leaving. Just look at him. He's practically elegant. Not so bad, but he looks more like a foreign wrestler than a man of the world. Well, let's say a wrestler who's doing good business, Maigret conceded. No goodbye kiss across the way. The man simply disappeared from view, and a minute later he emerged on the pavement and set off towards the Place de la Bastille. Darai will pick him up, Lucas announced, sitting there like a huge spider at the centre of his web. But he knows he's being followed. He won't do anything but walk around and maybe stop for a drink somewhere. As for the woman, she had taken a road map out of a drawer and spread it on the table. Ozep couldn't have taken a taxi, Maigret calculated. He must have come by metro, in which case he should arrive at any moment. If he's coming, he corrected himself. He did come. They saw him arrive, hesitate, wander up and down the pavement, while the detective trailing him displayed great interest in a fish stall in the Rue Saint-Antoine. Seen from above like this, the tiny pole seemed even thinner, even more insignificant. Maigret experienced for a moment a pang of remorse. He could hear the poor devil's voice repeating 100 times in involved explanation his famous "Monsieur Maigret." He was hesitating, that was obvious. He seemed even to be afraid, staring around him with a visible anguish. "Do you know what he's looking for?" the inspector asked Lucas. "The little pale fellow? No. Maybe some money to get into the hotel? He's looking for me. He's saying to himself that I must be somewhere around, and if by some miracle I've changed my mind, too late now." Michael Ozep had plunged into the dark hallway of the hotel. They could follow him with their minds. He would be climbing the stairs, reaching the first floor. "He's still stalling," Maigret announced. "The door should have opened before this. Oh, he's on the landing. He's gonna knock. He's knocked. Look." The blonde girl started, shoved the map with an instinctive movement back in the dresser, and went towards the door. For a moment they could see nothing. The two were in the invisible part of the room. Then suddenly the woman appeared. Something about her had changed. Her steps were fast, decisive. She went straight to the window, closed it, then drew the dark curtains. Lucas turned to the inspector with a quizzical smile. "Well now," he laughed, but his smile faded as he noticed that Maigret appeared to be concerned. "What time is it, Lucas?" 3:10. "In your opinion, what are the chances that one of the gang will come back to the hotel in the next hour?" "Doubt it, unless, as I was telling you, Spinach, if he knows the beard's out of the way. You don't look very happy." "I don't like the way she closed that window." "Are you afraid for your little Pole?" Maigret said nothing. "Have you thought," Lucas went on, "that we haven't any real proof that he is in that room? It's true we saw him go into the hotel, but he might perfectly well have gone to some other room and somebody else came." Maigret shrugged his shoulders and sighed. What time is it, Lucas? 3:20. Do you want to go over and see what's happening? Not yet, but I'm probably going to make a fool of myself. Where can you telephone? In the next room. He's a tailor who does piecework for one of the big houses, so he has to have a phone. Good. Try not to let him listen in. Telephone the chief and tell him I want him to send me 20 armed men at once. They're to spread a cordon around the Hotel Beau Séjour and wait for my signal. Maigret's expression indicated the seriousness of this order, which was so out of character, for the inspector usually laughed at police mobilization. You think there'll be dirty work going on? Lucas asked, if it hasn't already gone on. His eyes remained fixed on the window, on the filthy glass panes, on the crimson velvet curtains of the time of Louis Philippe. When Lucas came back from the telephone, he found the inspector still in the same place, still frowning thoughtfully. Boss says to be careful. There was a detective killed only last week, and if there should be another accident, be quiet, will you? Do you think they'd stand the killer? I don't think anything. I've thought so much about this case since this morning that I've got a headache. Now I'm satisfied just to have impressions. And at the moment I have the impression that some disagreeable things are happening or are about to happen. In the nearby room, the young girl was still asleep, her mouth open, her legs bent back. Higher up on the 4th floor, somebody was trying to play an accordion, incessantly repeating, with the same false notes, the same foxtrot refrain. Do you want me to go over? Lucas suggested. Maigret gave him a harsh look, as if his subordinate had reproached him for lack of courage. Do you think I'd hesitate to go myself? You're forgetting one thing. Once we're over there, it's too late. If we go and find nothing, we'll never pin anything on that gang. That's why I'm hesitating. If only that girl hadn't closed the window. He suddenly lifted his eyebrows. Tell me, the other times when she's been alone with a man, has she ever closed the window? Never. Then she hadn't any suspicion of your presence here. She probably took me for just another foolish old man. So it isn't the girl who had the idea of closing the window, but the character who came in. Ozep. Ozep or somebody else. The one who came in must have told the girl to close the window before he showed himself. Maigret suddenly took his hat from the chair, emptied his pipe, and scraped the bowl with his index finger. Where are you going, boss? I'm waiting for our men to get here. Look, there are 2 of them by the bus stop, and some others in that parked taxi. If I stay inside 5 minutes without opening that window, you come in with our men. You have your gun. A few moments later, Lucas could see Maigret crossing the street, could see Detective Janvier notice him and break off his task of wiping the tables on the terrace. After what seemed a miraculously short interval, the window across the way opened. Maigret signalled to his sergeant to join him. From across the street, Lucas had gathered that the room was empty, save for the inspector. He stumbled up a dark staircase, through the stench of bad cooking and worse plumbing, and entered the room, only to start back as he found the body of a woman stretched out at his feet. It was as if the murderer had wished to leave his signature on his crime. The woman's throat had been cut, as with all the other victims of Stan. There was blood everywhere. The bright picture on the wall turned out, on closer inspection, to be a portrait of Olga, even blonder, even more fresh-skinned than she had been in life. Lucas looked from the lushly alluring portrait to the unappetizing sight on the floor. He felt oddly like a drinking man who sees a bottle of fine brandy smashed. It was your Pole. Maigret shrugged his shoulders, still standing rooted in the middle of the room. Shall I give his description to our men so they can see that he doesn't leave the hotel? And I'd like to put a man on the roof just in case. Go ahead. Shall I call the chief? In a minute. It was no easy job to talk with Maigret when he was like this. Lucas tried to put himself in his shoes. Maigret himself had said he'd made a fool of himself, but this was worse than looking foolish. He had mobilized a large body of police when it was too late, when the crime had already been committed under Maigret's very eyes, almost with his consent, since he'd been the one who had sent Ozep into the Hotel Beau Séjour. And if any of the gang come back, shall I arrest them? Maigret nodded indifferently, and at last Lucas went out. "Where's Maigret?" the chief demanded of Lucas before he was halfway out of his car. "In the room, number 19, on the second floor. The people in the hotel don't know about it yet." A few moments later, the director of the Judiciary Police found Maigret sitting in a chair in the middle of the room, 2 steps from the body. "Well, my friend, it looks to me as though we're in a pretty fix." For answer, he received a grunt. "So, the notorious killer was none other than the little man who offered you his services. You must admit, Maigret, you might have been somewhat less trustful. Ozep's attitude was suspicious, to say the least." A heavy vertical furrow seamed Maigret's brow, and his jaws jutted out, giving his whole face a striking quality of power. "You think he hasn't managed to slip out of the hotel yet?" "I'm sure of it," said Maigret. "You haven't searched the hotel?" "Not yet." "You think he'll let himself be captured easily?" Then Maigret's gaze moved slowly away from the window, shifted towards the director. "If I'm wrong, the man will try to kill as many people as he can before he's arrested. But if I'm not wrong, things will take care of themselves." "I don't understand." "I'll tell you again, Chief. I can be wrong. Anybody can be wrong. In that case, I beg your pardon, because there's going to be trouble. There's something in this case that doesn't fit. I can feel it. If Ozep was Stan, there was no reason why—" His voice trailed off. "You're staying here, Maigret?" "Pending further instructions, yes." "Then I'll go and see what our men are doing outside." They had arrested Spinach when, as Lucas had foreseen, he had come to pay his call on the young woman. When they told him that Olga had been killed, he turned pale, but he showed no reaction when they spoke of Ozep. A half-hour later, it was One Eye's turn to come home and be arrested on the threshold. He submitted impassively, but when they told him of the woman's death, he tried to break free from his handcuffs and leap upstairs. "Who did it?" he shouted. "Who killed her? One of you, wasn't it?" "It was Ozep, alias Stan the Killer." The man quieted down as if by magic. He frowned as he repeated, "Ozep. You aren't going to tell us you didn't know your boss's real name?" It was the chief in person who conducted this hasty questioning in a corridor, and he had the impression that a faint smile crossed the prisoner's lips. Then came another of the gang, the one they called the chemist. He simply answered all questions with an air of absolute confusion, as if he had never heard of the woman, nor of Ozep, nor of Stan. Maigret was still upstairs with the dead woman, hunting for the key that would at last enable him to understand what had happened. "All right," he murmured when Lucas told him of the arrest of the beard, who had begun by raging like a fiend and ended by bawling like a calf. Suddenly he raised his head. "Do you notice something, Lucas? That's 4 of them they've arrested, and not one of them's put up any real resistance, whereas a man like Stan— But since Stan is Ozep, have you found him?" "Not yet. We had to let all the accomplices come home before we turned the hotel upside down. Now that we have almost all of them, the big boss is laying siege. Our men are downstairs and they're going to go through everything. Listen, Lucas." The sergeant had been about to leave. He paused, feeling for Maigret something akin to pity. "One Eye is not Stan. Spinach is not Stan. The beard is not Stan. But I'm convinced that Stan lived in this hotel and was the focus around which the others gathered." Lucas said nothing. Let the inspector have his monomania. If Ozep was Stan, he had no reason to come here to kill an accomplice. If he was not Stan— Suddenly Maigret rose, crossed to the wall and pulled down the brightly coloured picture of Olga. He tore away the tape that framed it, revealing lines of lettering above and below the face. He handed it to Lucas. The sergeant knew enough English to make out both the line above, "Real-life detective cases," and the lines below, "The pretty Pole and the terror of Terre Haute." Maigret was smiling now. "Vanity," he said. "They can't ever resist it. They had to buy the magazine when they saw it on the bookstores, and she had to frame the picture. I knew I'd seen her face before. I do remember the case roughly. I kept some cuttings on it, very similar to ours. In the Midwest of America, 4 or 5 years ago, a gang attacking lonely farms, cutting throats, just like ours. And they had a woman leader. The American press took great pleasure in describing her atrocities. Then Stan was Olga, almost certainly. I'll be positive in an hour, now that I know what to look for in the office. You coming with me, Lucas?" "But Ozep?" Lucas asked, as they settled back in the cab. "It's Ozep I especially want to look up. That is, I'm hoping I'll find something about him. If he killed this woman, he must have had a motive. Listen, Lucas, when I wanted to send him to the others, he agreed at once. But when I gave him an errand to the woman, he refused, and I was forced to use pressure. In other words, the rest of the gang did not know him. But the woman did. It took a good half hour to find the cuttings. Order was not Maigret's strong point. Read this. Always allowing for the exaggeration of the American press, they like to give the readers their money's worth. The female fiend, the deadly Pole, girl 23, heads murder gang. The press revelled in the exploits of the Polish girl and produced many proofs of her photogenic qualities. At 18, Stephanie Polinskaya was already known to the Warsaw police. Around this time, she met a man who married her and strove to curb her evil instincts. She had a child by him. One day, the man came home from work to find that his wife had vanished, taking everything of value with her. The child's throat had been cut. "You know who that man was?" Maigret asked. "Ozep? Here's his picture, and a good likeness. You understand now. Stephanie, nicknamed Stan, ran wild in America. How she escaped the American prisons I do not know. In any case, she took refuge in France, surrounded herself with a fresh lot of brutes, and took up her old career. Her husband learns from the papers that she's in Paris, that the police are on her trail. Does he want to rescue her once more? I doubt it. I'm rather inclined to think that he wants to make sure that the detestable murderess of his child shall not escape punishment. That's why he offers me his services. He hasn't the guts to work alone. He needs the police to help him. And then, this afternoon, I force his hand. Face to face with his former wife, what can he do? Kill or be killed? She certainly wouldn't hesitate to destroy the only man outside the gang who could testify against her. So he killed. And you want to know what I think? I'm betting that they'll find him somewhere in the hotel, more or less seriously wounded. After muffing 2 attempts at suicide, it would amaze me if he muffed a 3rd. Now, you can go back to the hotel and— No use. It was the chief's voice. Ozep hanged himself in a vacant room on the 5th floor. He made it, Maigret sighed. Poor devil. You're sorry for him? Indeed I am, especially since I'm somewhat responsible for his death. I don't know if it means I'm getting old, but I certainly took long enough to find the solution. What solution? The chief asked suspiciously. The solution to the whole problem, Lucas intervened happily. The inspector has reconstructed the case. That's so, Maigret? It is. I don't think I've ever been so mad at myself in my life. I felt that the solution was there, within reach, that just one little touch, and you all kept buzzing round me like horseflies, telling me about arrests that didn't mean a thing. And then I remembered the American Detective magazine and the woman's face on the cover. Maigret took a deep breath, loaded his pipe, and asked Lucas for matches. The afternoon vigil had used up all his own. What do you say, Chief? 7 o'clock? Suppose we 3 settle down to a nice glass of beer. provided that Lucas gets rid of his wig and makes himself respectable again. So now we come to the commentary. So in this I will say something about the author, something about the story, its publication details, and look at some of the themes that come up in the story that have appealed to me. Now, I'm not doing this as a professor of English or an expert or an academic. I'm doing this as just somebody who likes stories. So my views are no more valid than anybody else's. They're just my views. If you don't want the commentary, then the thing to do really is to just click on another story. I hope you stay on my channel, but this is part of the channel. It's not it's a podcast, so it isn't just an audiobook. I do compilations of just stories if you look out for those, and there is and you can just find those going from story to story. So let's say something, now we've established that, about Stan the Killer by Georges Simenon. I don't know why I did it in that accent, apart from Maigret himself says it sounds a bit American. So it is from French. Stan le Tueur by Georges Simenon was first published on December 23rd, 1938 in the weekly Police Roman, the French equivalent of such magazines as Black Mask and Dime Detective in the US. Renowned for his detective fiction, oh no, I was jumped ahead then. It later appeared in the collection Les Nouvelles Enquêtes de Maigret, published by Gallimard on December 23rd, 1944, just in time for the Christmas market. Actually, you would have thought they were a bit late. Doubt they could get it out on the shelves by Christmas because it's, only one more day of shopping. The story was subsequently included in Tous Simenon and Tome 95, that's French for you, spanning pages 83 to 106, the first American edition, translated by Anthony Boucher. I've said him like a French one, but he did a lot of kind of horror stories. I've done They Bite on the classic ghost stories and weird tales, really, and it appeared in Ellery Queen's mystery magazine. We've actually had an Ellery Queen story from that magazine on the podcast. It appeared in 1949, making it the first Maigret short story published in the US. Haha! Another translation by Anthony Boucher was published in 1960. Additionally, a translation by Jean Stewart in 1977 was included in the collection Maigret's Pipe 17 Stories. Came out in 1994. I remember when I was learning that French, and you may say you didn't do too well, did you? But one of the books was an easy read of Maigret's stories, so that was kind of good. Now, let's say something about Georges Simenon himself. He was born on February the 12th or 13th, and he claimed he was born on the 12th, but his birth wasn't registered till the day after. So this was him who said this. He's Belgian, like Poirot, and like the creator of Tintin, who was really known as Georges Remy. He was Belgian too. Lots of the Belgians around. Don't overlook Belgium, okay? So, I said he was born in Liège in 1903. He moved to Paris at the age of 19, worked as a journalist, and wrote prolifically under various pseudonyms. His literary breakthrough came with the publication of Pietre le Letton in 1931, introducing the world to Inspector Jules Maigret. Over his career, Simenon wrote 75 Maigret novels, 28 short stories, alongside numerous other psychological novels, totaling over 400 books which have been translated into 55 languages. His work is distinguished by its psychological depth and narrative economy. After living in the United States for a decade post-World War II, he returned to Europe, settling in Switzerland. Simenon continued writing until his retirement in 1972. I think he stopped writing novels in 1970. The 72 is weird. He still wrote non-fiction. That's maybe the extra 2 years. He died in Lausanne in Switzerland in 1989. So this story is... I've been reading a lot of detective stories recently, and there are certain winners, I think. Sometimes the stories are very two-dimensional, and the characters are two-dimensional, and the stories are two-dimensional, and basically you couldn't work it out till the very end when somebody kind of pops the very clever detective, such as Sherlock. Don't get me wrong, I think Sherlock Holmes is great. But there are a number of kind of copycats of Sherlock Holmes that are these intensely intelligent people, and they're superhuman in their deduction. Sometimes the authors play with them. We did one about Dover, the overweight English detective, who basically appears to be a bit of a slob, but he's not. He's very smart. Of course, we have Columbo as well, same kind of thing. So they were playing with these. If we look at sort of in the English-speaking world, particularly not completely in the UK, but particularly Dorothy L. Sayers and Agatha Christie, and the golden age of the, rather upper class, posh, not necessarily, because Miss Marple isn't, and of course Agatha Christie has Poirot, so I revise what I said there. But they're cosy, aren't they? They're different, and they have the clues, and they're often intricate. I think I did a quote last week from Raymond Chandler, who was saying, they happen in drawing rooms, and there's lots of dukes around and butlers, and it's always done with, this is unfair to Agatha, to be fair, but it's done with curare and some obscure poison. In fact, I'm just reading, I'm actually narrating The Murder of Roger Ackroyd at the moment, and she herself makes fun of this this kind of murder novel, because she wasn't without wit, Agatha, either. But so we have the cosy, not completely British, but strongly British golden age. There is a golden age in the US as well, but typified by perhaps the British lot. And then we have hard-boiled, very American, the hard-boiled, Dashiell Hammett, James M. Cain, Raymond Chandler, these, Sam Spade, etc., Philip Marlowe, living in this morally ambiguous world where the whole world feels like a sewer, and it's usually done because there's nobody nice in any of them. I think that isn't true either, because Chandler particularly has a way of pointing up the vulnerability of a lot of his characters and the inherent softness of them and kindness of them in a very difficult world. And I think Maigret does that as well, or Simenon does that as well. But sort of like Maigret's halfway between cosy and hard-boiled, and possibly slightly closer to hard-boiled, I think. The people he lives, the world he lives in, his characters move in, is, again, a bit of a sewer. It's the underbelly. But there are touches of comedy in it as well, and I thought that one of the great things about these stories is the comedy in them. And of course, the Golden Age have a lot of comedy as well. The hardboiled, not so much, apart from in a kind of wisecracking, very cynical way. And I wouldn't call it comedy. I mean, feel free to disagree with me. This is just my opinions. But I mean, Janvier, the waiter with the tables, and Lucas, who uses his job to, and you can say that's morally ambiguous, spy on attractive young women through their bedroom windows. I think clearly that is a crime, and he would have been arrested these days. There would have been internal affairs these days if it was. Yeah, and the other thing to say is, of course, is Maigret is a police procedural almost, isn't it? Well, not almost. It is. It's a police procedural. He's not a amateur detective, as in the Golden Age, and he is not a hardened, cynical private eye, as in the hard-boiled. Yeah. So he sits in the middle. I think one of the things that Maigret does really well, I think he does there are a number of things he does very well, and one of them is the construction of the story and the twists. So the plot itself, it's the setup. They're watching it. They're not getting very far, and he introduces this Polish guy. And I think through lots of misdirection, for example, he portrays the guy as absurd in the mannerisms, the bowing almost double, and all this. This character is absurd, and so we don't take him particularly seriously. And then he throws suspicion on him with the window closing. Somebody told her to close that blind. And then, oh, right, okay, so maybe he isn't as absurd. We begin to suspect there's something going on when Maigret himself, at the very beginning, Maigret is very dismissive of him. And then a bit later, he starts to give him more consideration, and it becomes apparent that what Maigret has been thinking about is of using this guy. Maigret is not totally trusting. Maigret does not feel that, I should say that Michael Ozep is the man that he says he is. There's something more to it. He's not the absurd comic figure. that he is written up as at the beginning. So I want to say something about my pronunciation of the name. So Ozep is not a Polish name. I thought I'd Polishify it by making it Ozep, and not Michael, but Michal. But if you notice, when the French are speaking, I pronounce it Ozep, as them failing to pronounce the Polish properly. In the same way that, Simenon has him called Maigret by the Polish guy, as in it's a mispronunciation. So I thought I'd return the favour and get the French to mispronounce the Polish name, even though Ozep or Ozep is not. So that's not, if you noticed an inconsistency there. If you listen to it very carefully, you will see there is no inconsistency. It's all done deliberately and with forethought. So, yeah, so the misdirections, and so he then misdirects us completely about Olga. He has us, and of course, I think the two, how he does this is he plays on our stereotypes and our prejudices, or the French reader of the time, let's say, to avoid any kind of culture wars going on in the podcast, which I want to avoid. So the French kind of would have had a view of a woman cleaning up. She's portrayed as cleaning up, shopping, and so then you pigeonhole her and go, well, she's a housewife. That's what she is. She's the moll, if you like, of the gang. She just cleans up after them. She isn't the murderer. Yeah. So we don't expect her to be this vain psychopath, this vicious, vain, psychopathic woman that she turns out to be. So he uses our prejudices and misdirects us by giving us evidence for the prejudices. There she is, shopping, buying chops, cleaning the picture, which is of herself, as it turns out. Very cleverly, he doesn't allow, even through the binoculars of Lucas, to identify that the picture is of her. So those are the things, our prejudices about our prejudices, really, in the sense of we prejudge. So Simenon knows about our prejudices, and he deliberately feeds us clues that we sit comfortable in our prejudices before tipping them, both about Ozep, as I insist on calling him, and Olga Cherevska, or Stephanie Polinskaya. Stephanie Polinskaya. So, who is a total monster, isn't she? She goes around killing people and adores herself. And yeah, you want to watch psychopaths, they're dangerous. So I think that's the first thing he does really well in the construction of the story. It's just, we're led down the garden path. We're misdirected. We have red herrings. I'm going to talk about something about the background noises again, as I always do, because I'm paranoid about them. So the scrap man is working today. It's been raining. I've been trying to wait for times when the scrap man isn't working, but he works very hard. And though it isn't raining, but I am in England, so it rains kind of all the time. And so you may have heard drops. You may have heard little Callie, the dog, who was having a bit of a sleep, just and had a funny dream during the sleep. And then you may hear little Noah, the grandson, who is teething, so he's unhappy. So, but this is just like, I'm not going to take these out. This is, I'm a real person, man. So, and I live in a real life with real people and real dogs and real rain and real scrap men. So anyway, so what was I saying? What he does really well, and the other thing that I think Simenon does fantastically well is the characterizations he gives, even in this short story. So we have the chief. And even through a few lines, we know this guy. His main concern is not even solving the murder. It's not avoiding people being killed. It's none of that. It's avoiding embarrassment. And anybody who's worked for an organization knows that reputational harm is the main driver of most organizations these days, and clearly then as well. So that's the first thing, the chief. Then we have Lucas. He's 20, and he watches pretty girls doing rude things, and many young men of 20 do that now. Let's just leave it at that. That's just what young men of 20 do. And so we get Lucas, and then we have Janvier, who's a bit kind of clumsy, and he spills things. He's the detective. We just, we've got these people, and then we have Maigret with this absolute drive to find the truth. More almost, it is about solving crimes.
it is about justice, potentially. But the picture we have is, this is his personal, self-absorbed quest, like a puzzle, like a Sudoku puzzle. But he, and that comes second, that I don't feel that Maigret is a monster, but he is so obsessed with the puzzle of unraveling it, and that is the paramount thing, not necessarily the deaths. He doesn't appear to be massively moved by them, of either the victims of the murders. I'm sure he is, as a policeman, wants to stop those, but the Olga being killed, he has some sympathy and pity for Ozep himself, who made the mistake of hitching up with the wrong woman. I'm going to tell you a secret if you didn't know this. Men make absolute fools of themselves for beautiful women, even when those beautiful women are not good for them. And everybody, both their male and female friends, can see it, but they can't, because they're like moths to a candle. And this is what our young Polish man, our young Polish second lieutenant, ends up in. You know, he has been hitched himself to a monster who kills her own child and his child. So that's his motivation, revenge. He wants to die. He really does want to die. We don't know why, but it's because his child has been murdered, and perhaps also because he's been taken in by this monstrous, psychopathic, but beautiful woman. And then the final motivation is is this narcissistic woman who has a picture of herself, who loves the fact that the American sensationalist true crime press. I have an issue with true crime, actually. I don't enjoy it at all. I think it's pornography, but you could argue about the morality of whether it's worse than sexual pornography. But it is us, or people who consume true crime, and it might be you. So, but this is for me. Let me say about me, I find it very uncomfortable. I don't like it. Sheila loves it. I love Sheila, but personally, I have a problem with true crime. But fictional crime, no. Listen, this is just me shooting the breeze, mate. Don't get too upset about things. So there we are, yeah, and we even have a picture of her. That's her motivation. So yes, there are absolutely great writers, and Georges Simenon was one of them. And I hope you enjoyed this story. I loved reading it, and people say, oh, you know, there are okay, well, the final diatribe. It's not a diatribe. The final comment is to say that how do I choose the stories? Well, kind of by title, kind of by author, and whether I like them or not. Okay, not just that though, because there are lots and lots of authors. There are, and you'll know that I think the hard-boiled stuff goes better with an American voice. I have American narrators who can do it very well. I'm happy for them to do that. I will do some of the English stuff. I probably won't do a Lord Peter Wimsey again, because he's too posh for me. I'm just not posh enough. But there are narrators who are, so I may use English. I've got a guy who I will use for that. The other reason, and so people say, well, what about blah 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 blah. Also, remember, this is my living, this is my business. So I also pick names that I know will get ears. I could go, there's this fantastic story, it's very fantastic, by a very fantastic writer that nobody's ever heard of, but it's fantastic, and I could do it. And I could go, yeah, it's fantastic, and nobody would click on it. I'm not saying nobody would click on it. And if they don't click, remember, I get paid by advertising. So that's the thing. If they don't click on it, we don't get paid. So whereas I'm not only going to do the most popular, but I am going to do some of the most popular from a purely business attitude. So there we are. That's me being very open with you. I hope you don't mind. I've got a couple more things to do today. Narrations. And I've got to say, I'm Noah's doing, of course. I was giving him a bit of a little cuddle before, but he's in a poor lad. But you remember when your teeth were coming through, it was painful. Anyway, I hope you're all okay, and I hope you didn't listen to this commentary if you didn't enjoy it. You don't have to. I'm not going to come around your house and insist. So take care, everybody. Sleep well.